We are looking for the wooden bookshelf. Also, in this wooden bookshelf, it contains or it includes more than 10,000 scriptures.
Have you ever wondered what would happen if someone opened a wall and found knowledge the world had completely forgotten? In 2003, that actually happened.
There are 84,000 scrolls and most of them are Buddhist scriptures. Some are elaborately decorated with golden letters and images of Buddhas. The two primary Buddhist texts, Kanjur and Tenjur, are written in golden ink.
Hidden behind a sealed wall in a Tibetan monastery was a secret library filled with 84,000 ancient manuscripts, untouched for centuries and packed with ideas that could totally change what we believe about history, science, and even the universe itself. Stick with me. You're about to discover something incredible. The discovery that shouldn't have happened. No one thought that a hammer hitting the wrong spot on a wall would be the first sign of things to come. It took place in Sakya Monastery, a huge fortress that is hundreds of years old and sits in the cold, thin air of the Tibetan plains. The temple is about 300 miles west of Lhasa. It looks like a peaceful, old sanctuary, tucked away in the mountains from the outside. What was behind one of its walls, on the other hand, had been waiting for 1,000 years. Sakya was formed in 1073, a long time before there were modern countries or borders. It quickly grew into a center of Tibetan Buddhism, where monks prayed, learned, and spent their whole lives handwriting texts. The northern part of the monastery used to have more than 100 houses when it was at its biggest. Its riches were safe behind thick stone walls, and the dry, high-altitude climate kept everything inside like a natural freezer. For keeping documents safe, it was the ideal setting. In 2003, no one was looking for information that had been lost. Cracks in the southern wall were being fixed as part of a normal repair job. Experts from the Tibet Cultural Relics Preservation Institute worked on the project with historian Lhama Jampa Phunak as the project leader. Before a worker's hammer made a strange, hollow sound, everything seemed fine. Something less solid than the thud you get from stone. At first, they thought it might be an old way to cool off, or a storage area that had been forgotten. Still, the strange sound made them curious, so they looked into it. They made a small test hole through layers of plaster and tightly packed clay to find out what was there. It wasn't trash that came out. It was empty space. They carefully widened the hole. As dust flew into the air, beams of light made their way into a dark room that hadn't been touched in hundreds of years. At first, what the flashlights showed didn't make sense. Rows and rows of gold-edged books stacked on wooden shelves that the light couldn't reach. It wasn't a bedroom. The room wasn't a closet. There was a whole library hidden in the wall. Experts said it felt like going back in time when they went inside. Everything was left just the way it was. Not a single book had been moved. Not a single shelf moved. The room was a vault that had been perfectly preserved by war, the weather, and even people who were just curious. The scholars quickly figured out that this wasn't just a random storage room. This place was hidden on purpose a long time ago. When the papers were counted, the researchers were shocked by the number 84,000. That number was chosen at random. In Buddhist thought, 84,000 is the number of lessons that the Buddha gave. It looked like the collection had been put together on purpose, like the people who sealed it wanted to keep all the information they could save. The count was later confirmed by checking. The Congressional Executive Commission on China even talked about how big the Sakya collection was, which was in line with stories that had been told orally for generations. But the real question was still, why do they need to hide this information? Also, why seal it so well that no one found it for almost 1,000 years? Historians think the answer lies in the violent past of the area. Tibet had to deal with attacks, changes in the government, and finally the Cultural Revolution, which in the 1960s destroyed most of northern Sakya. All over the area, books, statues, and other valuable items were set on fire. Maybe the only way to save a library was to hide it behind a wall. Someone who sealed it knew how dangerous it was and did something about it before it was too late. Because of what they did, 84,000 texts were saved, when almost everything else around them was destroyed. When researchers started to look through the books, they saw that the secret library wasn't just keeping history alive. It also had information that could change our ideas about how advanced ancient societies really were. The Archive of Civilizations. Going into the secret library was like going into a world made from all over Asia at the same time. There was more than one language written in the manuscripts. They created a world where different nations could coexist. Bookshelves held pages written in Sanskrit, an ancient Indian language, classical Chinese, which was used by imperial scholars, flowing Tibetan writing made by monks, and big Mongolian letters that were made during the time of the great Khans. This wasn't a mistake. It showed that Sakya was once a major hub in a huge network of knowledge that went across the Mongol Empire and linked cultures that don't usually go together in history books. And these manuscripts didn't just have spiritual lessons in them. As many as 1,000 books of Buddhist texts were available, but they only touched the surface. Around them were books that mapped out the sky and astronomy, mathematicians wrote about formulas that were years ahead of their time, and doctors wrote about treatments, surgeries, and herbal medicine. There were farming guides that helped people live in the harsh plateau climate, philosophical commentaries that tried to explain how reality works, historical records that kept track of events that might not have happened anywhere else, and administrative records that showed how empires ran their businesses. Records from the Yuan era were mixed in. They were signed when one of the biggest empires in history wanted to gather as much knowledge as it could into one place. The elements were beautiful in and of themselves. The only reason some books were kept alive is that the dry temperature in Tibet kept the palm leaves from going bad. Some were written on long rolls of silk with handwriting that was so thin it looked like it was done by a single hair. Iron plates were used to bind thick books. Some texts had letters that looked like they were made of real gold. There was a lot of artwork in illuminated texts, with pages lined with pictures of 1,000 Buddhas. The most amazing thing in the collection was sitting right next to them. A manuscript that weighed almost 1,100 pounds and might have been the biggest book in the world. The pages were thick like boards of wood, but the gold writing still shone like it was just written yesterday. A lot of these treasures were kept alive because of strong historical ties. Several texts were found to have been sent directly to Phagpa by Kublai Khan as gifts. Phagpa was the fifth leader of the Sakya school. These weren't just any gifts. They stood for friendship, respect, and the Mongols' desire to bring together different kinds of knowledge from China, India, Persia, and other places into one. The results of that vision were kept in the library, frozen in stone. And the truth is that Sakya was already known for its huge collection before the secret room was opened. In the late 18th century, explorers wrote that the rooms held thousands of manuscripts. They talked about texts written in gold, books bound with iron, silk papers that were 6 feet long, and colorful art. Just seeing the library was famous. As the researchers read through the items, they discovered that the collection didn't just hold historical records. It also held scientific ideas that were so far ahead of their time that the next discoveries would shake everything we thought we knew. the knowledge that shouldn't exist. What researchers found in the secret library not only shocked them, but it also made them question how history really happened. The writings showed that Sakya was more than just a place of worship. It was a place where science from China, India, Persia, Tibet, and the rest of the Silk Road came together to make something much more advanced than anyone had thought possible. The first shock came from reading about space. These were not just plain star maps that monks drew. They talked about how the planets moved, the cycles of eclipses, and star catalogs that were so thorough that they almost looked modern. It was said that some diagrams were so accurate that they were like astronomical charts made with telescopes, even though the people who wrote these books never had one. It was easy to see the effects. There were hints of Persian or Arabic methods mixed in with the Chinese star mapping techniques and the Indian mathematical astronomy. Sakya wasn't following the science of one culture. Instead, it was a mix of many. There was one chart that stood out the most. It looked like it recorded the famous supernova of 1054 CE, which was the same one that Chinese scientists had written down. The Sakya version, on the other hand, had extra figures that weren't in the Chinese records. This made a lot of people think. Did Tibetan scientists see the supernova in a different way? Or did they use math tools that weren't found anywhere else? No matter what the answer was, the manuscripts showed that someone here knew about the sky in ways that scholars didn't expect. Then the draft came out that really shocked the experts. An article that talks about how planets move in ellipses instead of perfect circles. Johannes Kepler wrote his laws in 1609, and they teach us about elliptical paths today. But this text was written hundreds of years ago. It means that students in Tibet in the Middle Ages were using ideas that Europe didn't start using until the early stages of the scientific revolution. If it turns out to be true, it seemed like they had a very accurate picture of the solar system long before Kepler was born. The math part of the finding made it seem even stranger. Numbers were written in manuscripts using a method that mixed Indian decimal notation with Chinese algebraic notation. This combination isn't found anywhere else in historical records, which means Sakya was a way for mathematicians from different cultures to share their knowledge. There were early trigonometric tables, algebraic formulas, and ways to do calculations in the documents that don't match the timeline of development taught in current textbooks. It showed that there was a mathematical society growing along the Silk Road, not just in one place. However, a manuscript that seemed to have thoughts about calculus shocked the scholars the most. It talked about rates of change, how to figure out a planet's immediate speed, and methods that are very similar to derivatives. These ideas are the basis of calculus, a field that was created by Newton and Leibniz in the 17th century. But this manuscript was written a very long time ago. The dates are correct, which means calculus did not start in Europe. It could have been found again there after being in the Himalayan information networks for a long time. It wasn't just the sky that held scientific shocks. Written records about medicine showed methods that were very advanced for their time. When they talked about eye surgery, they used a method that is still used in some parts of the world today. Another person gave specific measurements on how to do trepanation, which means drilling into the skull so that mistakes wouldn't be fatal. Some talked about cooking surgical tools before use, which was done hundreds of years before people knew about germs. The herbal remedies written down were based on plants that scientists now know can kill germs. These tests were not rough. They were planned carefully and tried and tested. The fortress that defied time. It's important to know what the Sakya Monastery used to be in order to understand why the secret library is still there when so much else around it has broken. In the 13th century, this wasn't just a place of worship. It was where Tibet's government was based. The Sakya abbots ruled the area during the Mongol Yuan era. They were both spiritual leaders and government officials. The morning prayers could happen in one building. The afternoon, political choices could be made there, and the evening work could be done there. Faith, power, society, and science all lived together in one place, which didn't happen very often. One of the main reasons the texts have been around for so long is the way the monastery was built. The walls were built to be very thick so they could stand up to hard winters and attacks from other armies. Being so high up kept the air dry, which slowed down the growth of mold and rot. The ink didn't fade much because many rooms stayed cold and dark all year. Even though these conditions weren't meant to preserve things, they turned Sakya into one of the best natural archives on Earth by mistake. The architecture was built so that every part worked together to keep what was inside safe. Sakya was really split into two main parts. The northern monastery was built in 173 and had more than 100 houses. It stood for almost 900 years until most of it was destroyed by the Cultural Revolution. There was only one hall left. The imperial government ordered the building of the southern monastery in 1268. It only lived because China's Premier Zhou Enlai stepped in to protect it. Many papers would have been lost forever if that one action hadn't been taken. The secret library that was found in 2003 is in the southern section, which now holds almost all of the remaining texts. When you think about Sakya's past, the choice to lock the room makes sense. Tibet was attacked, resisted, and people were afraid of the government. Knowledge was always one of the first things that was lost. The monks knew this. They knew how important what they had was, not just for Tibet, but for all the cultures that were linked by the Silk Road. Closing the room was a way to protect knowledge that could never be found again. It wasn't just to keep religion safe. As the world kept falling apart, it was important to keep science, history, health, and philosophy alive. Even though the library was safe, there was already a fight going on as soon as it was opened. The race to save, digitize, and decode tens of thousands of fragile manuscripts before time destroys what history almost erased. The race to save 84,000 voices. It wasn't enough to just find the secret library. When the chamber was finally opened, researchers saw that the real task wasn't finding the 84,000 manuscripts, but rather keeping them safe until time ran out. A lot of the texts were so weak that a warm breath or a short flash of light could start to damage them. For the rescue mission to start right away, it had to be done very carefully. The Tibetan Academy of Social Sciences started a huge project to digitize the past in 2011. Their easy but difficult goal was to use multispectral imaging to take pictures of every page of every manuscript so that no detail was lost. With this technology, cameras could pick up ink that the human eye couldn't see, bring back faded symbols, and show levels of writing that scribes had erased hundreds of years ago. The whole collection had been classified by 2022, but only about 20% of it had been digitized. For such a big collection, that number meant that thousands of pages had already been saved. It was even harder to work on the physical protection. Due to age and being kept alone, many texts had become fragile. There were pages that were stuck together like stone. Others were going away faster than experts could keep them stable. Controlled humidity was used to soften the pages of each fragile book. Ink treatments were used to keep the letters from flaking off, and custom storage boxes were made to keep the texts safe from air and temperature changes. It was important to be careful and slow at every step, because one mistake could erase history for good. Translation was an extra problem. Most of the books were written in Old Chinese, Mongolian, Tibetan, or Sanskrit, which are languages that you have to study for years to understand. Some of them used mathematics or medical terms that required more knowledge. Finding the right words in a single text could take years and months of work. With tens of thousands of copies left, it's clear that this project will last longer than the experts who are working on it now. But the findings are already changing what we thought we knew, and only 20% has been studied so far. Researchers discovered surgical manuals that change the way we think about ancient medicine, astronomical papers that question the timelines of physics, mathematical texts that reveal forgotten knowledge networks, and chronicles that describe foreign missions that no historian had ever written down before. These are big steps forward that were buried behind a wall for hundreds of years. Thanks for watching. If this discovery blew your mind, make sure you like, share, and subscribe for more deep looks. And don't leave yet. Click the next video popping up on your screen right now.